I never really thought that I was fetishizing anything. The idea that I would fetishize the material aspect of it, I don't think I was consciously doing that at all. But the actual material quality of paint and color, you have to be able to get to grips with it, otherwise it's not a real painting. They are about paint. I think a sense of place and geography affects the way I felt about art a lot. When I was first in New York, because I moved to New York at the beginning of 2002, stayed there for 3 years and moved to Dallas and have been there ever since. And the first thing that really affected me was the climate, which seems kind of a small thing, but actually the climate could be so hostile, and obviously really cold in the winter, but really hot in the summer, and it was really speeding up. The solvent evaporates out of the paint very quickly, and then the oil starts to cure very quickly, because I'm painting in a very thin layer. But because of that, you're always working against time, and that's hugely stressful. The time that the paint dries in. So even though the paintings take 2 months or 4 months, or in some cases even a whole year, and people think that I'm working in a very leisurely, sort of slow manner. In fact, you're kind of racing against time on a daily basis. If it dries on you, you've got to take off maybe a whole week's work, or even a whole month's worth of work. So quite early on in Dallas, I started thinking, I've got to have another way of painting. This is becoming so frustrating. But I've become renowned for having these very sort of beautiful, unified surfaces. That seemed to be my trademark thing. And when I finally got to the point where I wanted to try other things, people seemed to be surprised that I was this sort of painter rather than that sort of painter. And it felt slightly ridiculous, like it was like coming out sexually or something, that you're meant to suddenly say, actually I like thick paint, and I like to sort of make a painting in a day instead of in 2 months. I mean, in this show there's a row of 5 or 6 small abstract paintings, 2 of which were made in 2005 and the rest of which were made this year or last year. They're very consistent. I don't think people would know that they're made over a period of time. I think that's because that's the equivalent of my speaking voice or something. These are how they come out when I'm just improvising or just making a painting. This is my hand or whatever, and this is my palette. When I started making these small ones, I think it was this one. This one in particular was going to be a small painting of a very blurry girl in a swimsuit. And I had it drawn out, and I had which had taken a couple of days, and I had the colours all mixed up, ready to go. And the colour mixing takes me forever. I mix huge amounts of colours really precisely according to matching the photographs. Anyway, I'd got all that ready to go for this thing, and I suddenly couldn't stand it anymore. Like, I'm not going to do another one of these things. And but with the colours from this photo, I suddenly thought I'm just going to make a little abstract painting. It was actually very therapeutic. And it's just a question of trying to make sort of moments and passages that somehow work with each other. But then some of the other ones that I started doing, some of these newer ones, I found myself to be intensely anxious when I was making them, because I so want them to be successful paintings that as I start to do them, all the control that went into the other sorts of paintings is suddenly out the window, and you've got no idea what you're doing, and you might as well be 10 years old again or whatever. Whatever the source material was that I was taking from, there had to be a transformation that was significant and clear somehow or other. So scale was a great transformative dynamic. I don't know why scaling something up can be so fulfilling sometimes, but I think taking something up to the size of the human body and beyond that just creates something exciting. And it creates something that feels like it challenges the viewer in a certain, it confronts the viewer. I had this idea a long time ago, actually, to create large photographic prints that were very similar to some of the paintings that I'd made. And these large photographs are photographs of figures that are very small, 1.5 inches tall or so. And in the late 90s, I made paintings from these same models. And I'd realized that when the figure is really tiny, that the scale of the sort of goops of the oil paint sculpturally changes. Not only are you adding color, but you're changing its form as well. So I was sort of sculpting and painting at the same time onto these figures, but always with a view to scaling them up, to make them into paintings. And what was kind of fun about it was that the tininess of it completely negated any control that you might have and trying to draw well and all these problems that everyone has with paintings, and make this difficult thing. Having made 10 or 12 or something of these paintings over a 2-year period, which were quite grueling to make, just because there's no way I could paint these things from life because the viewpoint shifts so hugely and it would be so exhausting. So you naturally make a maquette out of a photographic print to make it. But of course the prints themselves were quite beautiful things, and it seemed completely logical to scale one up. Of course, when we did make these very recently, which was just this summer, we had to use a kind of robot camera that got in close enough. But the sort of exciting thing was seeing all the dust and the crap on it that you can't see with the naked eye. Or the fact that the one behind me which is the only one that actually had kind of modeling clay. It's a female figure, that one, and it was meant to be beautiful and voluptuous, but it came out quite grotesque. But that cracked over the years, the paint on it, and the clay has cracked, and the clay sucked the oil out of the paint, and it became sort of dried and wizened and old looking, which I was disappointed at when I got it back out of its box after 10 years, because the other ones have stayed quite glossy. But I liked the old one because it became like an antiquity, like an old Greek vase or something that had been chipped and put back together or something. So I like to think it's like a relic, something from the British Museum or something.